It might be argued that a well-armed international police force operating under the authority of such a supernatural court could well serve this purpose. In other words, they're going to set up another threat. This is threat number 3, actually, an omnipresent, virtually omnipotent political or police force. It's an international police force, because remember, if we go into peace, we have to dissolve the nations, because war is the reason we have nations. All right, so the report then that was issued by the State Department, Freedom from War, and the program was to establish a permanent international peace force within the United Nations. In other words, to deliberately bring it up. The peacekeeping capabilities of the United Nations would be sufficiently strong, and the obligations of all states under such an arrangement sufficiently far-reaching as to assure peace and a just settlement of differences in a disarmed world. They're going to use the United Nations to keep the peace. In other words, a world government. During stage 2, states will develop further the peacekeeping processes of the United Nations to the end that the United Nations can effectively suppress any threat or use of force by anyone, and that would include the American people. It's going to be omnipresent, and it's going to be omnipotent in its ability to handle. And this is what Revelation says, who can make war with the beast? Remember that the U.S. and Russia are to have their internal or militaries turned over to the United Nations in this 3-stage process, and we end up with the UN in total control of the world. And it's the Security Council itself that determines the existence of a threat, breach, or act of aggression. And it can even walk in under the threat, or it's a possibility that we might have problems. And they determine the existence of any threat to the peace. So they can come in, if they choose to, on very fragile grounds, which is exactly what they did in Somalia. Should the Security Council consider that measures provided in 41, which are more economic, I don't know exactly what word to use, but sanctions, I guess, is the best word to cover it. If that doesn't work, if economic sanctions do not work, then they can resort to military powers, and they can use whatever they have. The United Nations is to be brought up to full global power with an army so powerful that none can fight against it. That's the entire plan. It will also break into pieces the entire world, and that's done under Article 52, which deals with regionalism, which is in fact breaking the world into pieces. And this is how they do it. They actually subdivide the world into 10 regions. That came out of the Club of Rome, and here are the regions on the TV screen. Region 1, of course, is North America, and it's Region 1 by virtue of the fact that North America, and particularly the United States, is the primary power behind the United Nations, enabling this to happen. The United States itself is broken down into 10 federal regions. We have global regions, and now we have national regions. And this is George Bush and Clinton and the rest of them have continuously pushed this arms control treaty because they have to disarm us in order to make this thing work. If you will recall, we discussed that in the constitutional crisis. The MJTF police means multi-jurisdictional task force police, and it removes all citizens from local, county, and state protections that you had under the law. And they're just abolishing all of this. And the MJTF police mission, we believe, is the house-to-house search and seizure of people. It's made up of National Guard units, state and local police, convert street gangs as needed into deputized police. House-to-house search and seizure, separation and categorization of men, women, and children as prisoners in large areas. Now you have to understand that in order to liquidate the millions of people that Jesus Christ says are going to be liquidated, they have to plan this out long before it happens. 1965, they started the Office of Law Enforcement Assistance. Then came in 1968 the Omnibus Crime Control Act, which converted the OLEA to the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration. They called, in turn, in 1971 for a regionalized police force. In 1971, an advisory commission on intergovernmental relations issued a pamphlet called M67, which called for a special multi-county and interstate police force. In other words, the merging of all police forces into one federal group. The LEAA in 1973 made calls for the elimination by merger of small police forces. This is exactly what Germany did under Hitler. All dictatorships have two common characteristics: general confiscation of guns in order to prevent internal rebellion, and the establishment of a national police force to enforce the edicts of the dictator. We are following Nazi Germany almost to the exact letter. Carter issued an executive order 12-148, and he established the Federal Emergency Management Agency known as FEMA. FEMA absorbed the LEAA and became the primary control organization for internal security of the United States in an emergency. Under the executive orders of FEMA, mandatory registration of all people, including babies and children in the United States, at the United States Post Office. They have boxes in them. We already know about it. They're marked for emergency use only. The primary one here to look at is 11,000, seizure of all civilians and work brigades, which is in reality slavery, and includes the rights to split up families as well. In essence, what will happen in America is going to be worse than the communist revolution in Russia. This plan provides the basis for the deployment and employment of military resources, including National Guard personnel, for civilian disturbances. So Iron Mountain external threat number 3 has been and is now being implemented. An omnipotent police force.